Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cozy Corner Chronicles. My name is Julia,
And I'm Liz.
and we are back with another chapter chats for a little life. Woo woo.
Woohoo! These two chapters that we read, so we finished up part two with chapter two and chapter three. And I think this was the most high of the book that we've read so far, if you
hmm
agree with me.
I definitely agree, but of course, with highs comes lows. So we just want to warn everybody about the same trigger warnings we had in our first episode. But these last two chapters mostly focus on self harm. So if that's not for you, I suggest tuning in to Lunar Love or doing something that makes you happy. So we take we're not offended at all if you don't want to listen to it. We know it's not for everyone. So yeah.
Yes, we completely understand. So let's just go ahead and jump into part two, chapter two. And it kind of opens up first. The really notable thing about this chapter was that it was written in first person. Everything that we've read so far has been in third person, but it was first person without identifying who was speaking to begin with. So that was really interesting. And even though that happened, I feel like you could still kind of tell who it was.
hmm
Um, but eventually, we start to realize that the speaker is Harold and he is communicating to Willem, and it's unclear whether the chapter is a letter or another form of communication. So Harold basically tries to explain um, where he has started to share kind of like a deeper relationship with Jude in terms of where they're headed, because I know they always talked about like, oh, we're friends, Jude and Harold are friends. I Jude is friends with his wife, like it was, all of those things. And so it becomes more parental in a sense, and I know we had alluded to this the past
hmm
chapter chats, and we kind of talked about how we were like, oh, Harold is kind of like a dad to Jude, or when Jude would peek around the corner and he saw Harold and his wife in the kitchen cooking and stuff, he was like, oh, I wish they were my parents. So it was kind of interesting. Harold then starts explaining his own background, how he grew up happy, he had a really kind father and a really nice stepmother. And then obviously we kind of learn more about Jacob, how he died at 5 years old. And we don't figure out why at this point, but he's speaking to Willem as if he already knows about the details of Jacob's death. And so he explains more that he became really impressed with Jude and how Jude was in law school because he was one of the only students who could separate the idea of when something is right versus when something is fair. He also feels super guilty about how has been mentoring Jude because he thought he taught Jude to think more like a lawyer, and then kind of taking away, his creativity, his mental creativity.
Yeah, so this chapter was definitely short compared to the last chapter of part one. Like
Oh
that
my
last
gosh,
chapter was so
yes.
many, I know. But I almost don't like that it's written in first person. I only say this because to me it's really sounding like he's talking about Jude in like past tense. In my mind, it feels like it's kind of
Mm.
foreshadowing the fact that something is happening with Jude, especially since in the next chapter there's a lot of self-harm that's escalating for
Mhm.
Jude. And I don't like that
Mhm.
because of course when things are happy, they can't stay that way. So
Wow. I never even put it together that way. So that's really interesting that you say that. And now that I think about it, I'm like, wow, that's kind of true.
yeah, because there was another part or another section in the last episode that we talked about where Willem was literally like, I would think back on this conversation that we just had. And so I was like, I don't like that. We're talking about it as if they're kind of recounting the memories with Jude, and it's making me
Mm.
nervous. I don't like it. I don't like it.
I know. And I remember we talked about this in a way past episode where we were like,
Mhm.
I like when we're prefaced with someone is going to die or someone is going to X, Y, and Z. And I feel like this book is just so full of like, not mysteries, but so much just unclear waters.
Yeah, like it's very uncertain. You're not, it's like you know something is coming. You can feel it. You can feel the tension. you're just waiting for it to happen, but I don't know, we could be completely wrong. Like I could be
Hmm.
100% wrong and it could be for like Harold who like dies, and that would devastate me even more too. So, I mean, who knows?
Right. Right.
So, I think it was definitely unique. Like you said, it was we've never read anything that was in first person thus far in the book. So that's why to me I was like, "Oh, I'm kind of glad we got this first person narrative from Harold though because we know what Jude sees Harold as, but we never really get the other side of it with how Harold feels about Jude. And I think after reading this
Right.
chapter, you can definitely solidify the fact that Harold and Julia really, really love Jude.
Yes, and I'm so glad that they really, really honed in on Harold kind of stepping in and taking in that fatherly role. I feel like that's something Jude really, really needed after we kind of figured out everything in terms of the monastery. So I feel like he always craved that, being wanted as a child or being wanted just as a part of a family. And so I'm really glad that we got to see Harold's point of view and that it wasn't just one sided in terms of how Jude felt or versus how Harold and Julia felt.
Yeah, I agree. So that made me happy. I was very happy for Jude. So then jumping
Yes.
into the next chapter, so chapter three, which finishes off part two. So
Hmm.
now we kind of get a little more background about JB and Malcolm because in the last chapters we were really only hearing about Willem and Jude.
Hmm.
So now we go back to JB. So JB is now a successful painter. Remember all his projects about his taking pictures of friends and turning them into artwork? Well, that landed him something because now he's actually going to
Yes.
be showcasing his completed series at the New York City Gallery. So
Mhm.
the series, of course, features those photographs and his paintings of his friends that JB was working on. And when he began taking photographs for the series, Jude, like we had said, had only agreed to be photographed on the condition that JB shows him what photos he's going to paint, and then that on the condition that Jude will also approve the ones. But, you
Mhm.
know, JB didn't really follow that. So
Yeah.
when Jude shows up to this gallery and all that stuff, he sees photos that he's never approved. And Jude is very, very self conscious as it is. So one that he sees is one where he's in an episode of Pain, and Jude had taken a picture. I mean, sorry, JB had taken a picture of it, painted it, and of course, Jude feels betrayed. And honestly speaking,
Mhm.
I would kind of feel betrayed too because it's something vulnerable. Like it's not me just sitting in a bench with my winter coat on. It's like me in pain. So I get it. Like I completely
Mhm.
understand why Jude feels that way. So Jude, of course, confronts JB with the feelings of betrayal after the show, but JB just refuses to take fault. He's like, no, I didn't do anything wrong. Like, all's fair
Mhm.
in love and war for my art gallery, blah, 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 blah. So, because of this, the group kind of separates. And
Mhm.
as we've talked about before, Willem and Jude are basically besties. Like, out of the group, it's Willem and Jude. So, Willem, who's taking acting, has whose career has now kind of taken off because now he's gotten more roles and really big roles in different films and live action, all that stuff. He takes Jude's side completely and cuts out JB from his life, while Malcolm thinks Jude has a reason to be angry, but is not really willing to sever the ties with JB. Like he's kind of the bystander, if you will, in this situation.
Mhm.
So after many months go by, JB sends one of his paintings to Jude as an apology. It doesn't he doesn't really send a note that has apology in it, but that's kind of his way of being like, I'm sorry, here you go.
Mhm.
So Jude ends up contacting him and accepting the apology, but he is distressed to have learned that even people who he thought had earned his trust could one day betray him. So that's kind of a big thing for him, right? Because he doesn't trust people. So now he's like, oh, even people I know can hurt and betray me. Yikes.
Yeah, and
So,
I feel like they should have knew that that was going to be a trigger for him. Like as soon as he had put up his art gallery, I mean, don't get me wrong, I get it. JB needed to do what he needed to do in order to thrive the way he was going to, but it's also like yes, he said, when he was like Jude is the most interesting to
mhm.
photograph and to paint and all this stuff, and I get it, but it's like don't you feel like you guys have been friends long enough to know that maybe Jude is mysterious for a reason?
Right. And I mean, they alluded to the fact that when all of them went to that, like that beach house that Harold and Julia owned, that they all knew that something was, wrong, or
off.
they knew
Yeah.
that there were things in Jude's past life that he didn't want to talk about. So to me, like,
Hmm.
I would definitely be more on Jude's side here, because Jude is always mysterious. And when you're mysterious and you're in episodes of pain, you obviously don't want people photographing that and then showcasing it, because something in the book that it says that each of the paintings has a description. So people know
Hmm.
exactly what's going on. Like, it would say something like
Hmm.
Willem and girl he's looking at, you know?
Yep.
So
Yep. Yep.
it's not a secret that it's Jude in Episode of Pain.
Right. And that was the other thing too, is like no one ever saw that side of him other than Willem. So I think it
Hmm.
was even more of a shock that not only did JB see it, but he photographed it, and then now it's like an image that someone can see forever.
Right. So, I mean, you guys can tell us whose side you're going to take, but I'm on Jude's side. Like, sorry, JB.
Definitely, definitely.
But yes, continuing on. So that Thanksgiving, Willem and Jude go to Harold and Julia's house as usual. And Jude is stunned when Harold and Julia tell him that they would like to adopt him. And this just made my heart soar. I was so happy. And I was like, yeah.
Yes, I think this is the best. Like, and it was so cute because Harold and Julia were like extremely nervous, obviously, because that's like a big ask. And also,
Hmm.
it's really rare to be like, hey, I want to adopt you, and you're 30 years old, you know?
Hmm.
Like, that's just like not something that's common. It does happen, but it's not common. And so, this like literally made my heart scream. I was like, shut up. Because now, not only is it something that they feel emotionally, it can be tangible.
Yes. And I felt like I was so happy because Jude was like freaking out, because Harold and Julia didn't go, "Hey, like, I got good news for you." It was like, "Hey, we need to talk." And Jude's like, "Oh my god, they don't want to be my
Yes.
friend anymore. Like, we can't hang
Yeah.
out anymore." But no, it was really great news, and it just, like you said, it made my heart soar. I was really happy for Jude, and I was just really happy that their relationship could finally be like father, mother, and son. So, yay.
Yes.
So, of course, although Jude is already an adult, because of the adoption, if they both agree, they can pass their inheritance to him if he is their adopted son officially. So, more importantly, of course, like we said, they recognize that the gesture would basically say that they are legally, of course, parents and son, which
Hmm.
would mean the world to Jude. And although Jude is initially overwhelmed with happiness, he kind of falls into a state of really bad anxiety over the next several weeks as he kind of waits for that final court date for their adoption. Like, he starts avoiding
Hmm.
them. He starts like kind of ghosting them because he's just so nervous. And I think
Hmm.
in someone like him with that kind of past, it's very natural to be panicking, because you almost like don't believe that good things can come to you. So sad, but kind of the reality of someone who's gone through trauma, of course. So
Hmm.
he's consumed, not confused. Wow. He's consumed with fear that Harold and Julia will somehow find out more about his past and the things that he's done, and kind of be like, "Ooh, I don't want you as my son. No, no, yeet."
Hmm.
And kind of feel like he almost deceives them and doesn't want to betray them because of him not disclosing every little thing that he's done in the past. So, to cope with his anxiety, he self harms, which of course is really sad. And it's not like the amount of self harm that was in the first little chapter chat we had for this. It's like progressing to the point where I think even when Andy sees him, he describes it as like his whole entire arm or like his whole entire leg. So, the self harm, of course, increased, and very sad. So,
Yeah, that part really like made me realize what Jude had going on in his head, because it's like he doesn't feel deserving of being adopted, or he doesn't feel
mm,
deserving of Harold and Julia's love, which is so unfair and unfortunate because I mean, very cliche, but I feel like everybody deserves love. Everybody, deserves to feel wanted or to feel like they belong somewhere. And like I feel like Harold and Julia were giving him, that obviously that opportunity to feel like he fit in somewhere, to feel like he belongs somewhere, to feel like he fit in with a family, which he
mhm,
very much does fit in with Harold and Julia. And it's just like the fact that he got so much anxiety over it, and the fact that he felt like he was deceiving them or that he couldn't tell them the full truth, made me really sad, because like he doesn't have those coping skills, or he doesn't, like, again, he just doesn't feel deserving of any of that.
Right, and that's his defense mechanism for sure because, he's shutting people out. He's like, "Oh, if I don't let them get too close to me, then they won't find out. I won't have to have
Hmm.
anxiety about losing them, etc." So, of course, it's sad to see because I think by far Jude in this story definitely is the one who deserves all the love in the world, all the care in the world. And it's just sad to see that he thinks that way about himself because I'm sure as readers we're like, "But Jude, you're amazing. Like, listen to Harold
Hmm.
when they tell you that."
Right.
So then continuing on, Jude remembers an earlier time he thought he was going to be adopted when a couple took him from the home for parentless children during like a 1 week adoption trial. So this was when he was younger. Jude was on his best behavior. He even like cooked for them, cleaned for them, kind of was like the perfect son. And Mrs. Leary, basically one of the adoption people, hinted that adoption was likely going to be an outcome. But after the couple dropped him off at the home, and the week ended, he basically never saw and heard from him again. And Jude, of course, because of this type of trauma and past, he's like, oh, I'm comparing it to Harold and Julia. They're going to think they want me and then they're going to drop me last minute, even though I was like the perfect son for them.
That part pissed me off so much because I get it, like he wanted to be adopted and stuff like that, but the first thing when someone's like, "Oh, are you cool if you go by Cole?" Like, that part really just like rubbed me the
Red
wrong
flag.
way. This child has been through so much trauma already, and obviously, like, you see he's sitting here in this adoption center, like waiting to be placed in a home and all this stuff, and the first thing you say to him is, "Hey, are you cool if we call you Cole?" I don't know what the
Like,
name was. I don't know if it was even
yeah, no,
Cole, but
it was cold, but it's like, yeah, just strip away his identity. Why don't you like,
it
I
was the
agree with
weirdest
you.
thing.
I know it rubbed me the wrong way, and I was like, can't lie, Jude, you definitely dodged a red flag there. You dodged a big
Yeah,
bullet.
a
Like,
huge.
but it was still sad. Like, he's still a child, and I
Hmm.
don't know. Just can we just have one happy thing? Like, our one happy thing was the adoption, but everything else that surrounds it, I'm still like,
Yeah. It's
ugh.
like, even though something happy happens, like, it's still like sat 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 sat.
Yeah,
Sat.
exactly. And God, it's so sad. So the day of the adoption finally arrives for their court date, and Jude is basically so surprised that everything is going smoothly. And all of his and the Steins' closest friends attend the courtroom ceremony and a party afterwards at Harold and Julia's house. What I loved about this part was that so Willem was actually supposed to not be there because his recording had gotten delayed. And as a
Yes.
surprise, when he found out it wasn't actually delayed anymore, he didn't tell Jude. He only told JB and Malcolm that he was flying in. And so when Jude had opened the door and saw Willem, it was, oh man, my heart was so happy. I was so happy that he could make it.
Yes.
Ah, jeez.
That was cute.
Happiness. I know.
I was so happy for that surprise. And I don't think he wanted anyone more, or anyone there more than Willem. So that was
Exactly.
sweet.
So that was really sweet. So, as an adoption gift to Harold and Julia, Jude records himself singing some of their favorite classical music. But of course, when the time comes to present the CD, he starts to feel self conscious. So instead, he actually just hides the disc along with the handwritten letter between some of Harold's books on the shelf. And another thing that was cute was Harold's gift to Jude was a watch that his dad had given him. So and it has the initials either engraved or I forget what the word is, like something on it.
Yeah,
So
engraved.
right, it's so cute. So Harold's dad had his name engraved and then had Harold's name engraved. So Harold's giving it to Jude with Jude's initials engraved. So I
Yes,
just
and they gave it. Passed it down. So Harold's dad passed it down to Harold when he was 30, and
mhm.
then Harold gave it to Jude. He was like, "I know your 30th birthday already passed, but you're still 30, so it counts." It was so cute.
I know, just the cutest freaking thing, and I just oh, and then of course, like everybody else gives gifts too, but I think the most significant ones were, of course, those two. So it ends with then you kind of remember Felix, everybody, the little kid that Jude was tutoring. So part two
Oh,
concludes.
Felix.
Yes, I know. Part two concludes with a brief scene of Jude tutoring Felix, who is, of course, still depressed about the fact that he doesn't have any friends. But it tells you that Felix is actually going to be starting school soon. So Jude comforts him by explaining how he grew up with no friends, but later on was able to make wonderful friends in life, and basically comforting Felix, saying, like, hey, I know you're scared you're not going to make any friends, but just like what I went through, you will find friends and you will hopefully find happiness, even if you think that you're not ready for it. So I think that was a really good parallel because Felix definitely is almost like, I don't want to say an exact parallel because it doesn't, we don't know Felix has this kind of trauma that Jude has, but
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the internal feelings that you get from Felix definitely mimic how Jude feels about himself. So,
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think he has more of a tender heart for Felix because, like you said, he's been there. He was that kid. So it's like he, I don't know, I feel like he's trying to prevent Felix from going down the same road, except like he wants Felix to figure it out, if that makes sense.
right. And so overall, I think these two chapters were like happy. Like I felt mostly happy, and I don't know if that's a great feeling because I don't like to be happy and then suddenly be so sad. So we'll see
Yeah.
what the next parts have to bring, but I actually am thoroughly enjoying this book. I think at first, I'm not going to lie, I was kind of like digging through the mud trying to get through it because I just wasn't sure what the premise of the book exactly was supposed to give you. But now that I'm reading it more and more, I actually really like it. So,
I, I definitely agree with you. I feel like the first part was a trek. And I feel like it was because we were getting so much background knowledge, which again, like, I don't hate her for that because I get wanting to get all of that out, needing to kind of like set a
mhm.
storyline, set a baseline for everything. But it was just so long. Like, you know, anywho's,
Right. And I think another
I
thing that
do.
we had even talked about too was like she gives you a lot of background, but then your questions don't get answered. Like all about Jude. You're like, what's happening with Jude? What's happening with Jude? And then it isn't till the postman where you finally are like, oh, so that's what's
Mhm.
happening with Jude.
Yeah. And then the other part of it is too, like, going back to how you were like, oh yeah, Harold is speaking in first person, like all this stuff. It seems like he's kind of like remembering Jude. It kind of makes me really, really nervous for what has to come because like I just feel like I'm not emotionally ready for that. So I'm scared. But like you said, I am thoroughly enjoying the book. I feel like even though it is lengthy, it's like a good lengthy. Like there's always something happening or there's always something that is tying into like a deeper meaning of the characters or things like that.
Right. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, yeah, I'm like devouring this book like I would like my fantasy YA books. But in a different sense, I still find it hard to put the book down. Like, I find
Mhm.
myself still wanting to read everything almost in one sitting because I want to know. And I don't know if it's a big part of it is the anticipation because I know TikTok and everybody who films themselves like crying. I'm like, I don't know if it's because I'm anticipating that, but
Yeah.
I mean, I find it hard to put the book down in my own sense, different than my YA books. So, I mean, that's a good sign.
Yes. So, with that being said, we hope that you guys enjoyed these two chapters that we just read, and let us know what you think about what you've read so far, or if you're going to read the book now that you've listened to the podcast, like all whatever input you have about the book, we'd love to hear it. We are going to be starting chapter three. No, sorry, part three. So, we'll be reading the first two chapters of part three in the next chapter chats.
Yes. So stay tuned, guys. Thank you guys so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.